Human Rights Day is observed annually on the 10th of December. This year, this is on a Saturday, and we at GMSKN want to take the opportunity to speak on this topic today, the 9th. Observed by the international community every year, it commemorates the day in 1948 when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our next guest has over 10 years in the field as an attorney at law and as an advocate. She is versed on the issue of human rights. Please join us in welcoming Ms. Angelina Sookoo-Bobb. Can you give us a brief rundown on your legal background?
I've been an attorney at law since October 2020.
Congrats.
I migrated from Trinidad to St. Kitts in March 2011, and I've spent most of my legal career practicing in the courts from the Magistrates Court to the Privy Council. My area of law would be civil litigation, and I also practice in a niche area of constitutional law and election law.
Both very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Civil litigation, as I asked Gard, is a lot of hard work with no thanks. How do you deal with that area of law?
I live for it.
Oh, I like that.
I also should say, with civil litigation, there are different parts. So
Okay.
I'm usually involved in what I call complex civil litigation.
Okay.
So I don't do family law.
Okay.
And most of the topics that I do are very different. And so I always like the opportunity to be intellectually challenged.
Okay, great to know. So you're a keen advocate for human rights. Have you been able to, let's say, advocate for human rights in your daily practice?
I do. I'm proud to say that some of the cases that I've been involved in are referred to as seminal cases and are taught at the Cave Hill Law School. Two of the most popular ones would be, a few years ago, there was a young lady whose intimate sex videos were leaked by police officers in Nevis. And I took up the matter, and the human right that I advocated for would have been the right to privacy and the right to the protection of property, which of course I had to ensure the definition of property now includes virtual property and digital property. And we were able to get a sizable award of $500,000 in total, both for her and her male partner. That case, I went on appeal, and the Court of Appeal upheld the decision as well as the award. The description of the award was different, but it was upheld. And so when you are in Cave Hill, now one of the cases you will use to discuss human rights and including privacy is that case. It's called Jovel Williams and Jaisal Campbell against the Attorney General. Something I started in, I believe it was 2016, or it may have been a little earlier.
I remember that case, in fact, yes.
And congratulations on it.
Thank you.
Its outcome.
The next most significant one, I think, would be involving Leon Nathan Nelson and the Attorney General, where we challenged the inability of persons working in the public service to vie for political office while being a public servant.
That's really a landmark case.
It
Because that
is.
changed the way that we do things here.
It does. Not just in St. Kitts, but it has since been quoted and adopted throughout the common Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court jurisdictions, which would be the OECS.
Wow, you've accomplished lots, man. Many congratulations. Let me say that. That's good. So why would there need to be, or why would we need to have a declaration on human rights?
I think the need to have a universal declaration on human rights is as applicable today as it was in 1948. The document is an amazing document. There are 30 rights that are guaranteed and are considered to be inalienable, meaning as long as you're human, you're entitled to it. What I like about the document, which it took 3 years to work on, is that it's a living instrument. So the need for humanity and dignity remains today as it did in 1948. Now, it may not mean that things such as slavery or the right for women to vote or to be seen as equal are as applicable now, but there are other types of discriminations for different types of minority groups that remain applicable, whether it's for disability, LGBTQI persons, persons of ethnic minorities. So it's still very much applicable. And in our parts, there's this perception that human rights are only breached if you see, for example, extrajudicial killings, or no, we don't recognize that in our day-to-day lives there are different ways that human rights are either infringed or limited in an unreasonable way. And this, for example, may be the inability of black boys to wear an afro at school. I'm not even going to Rastafarian hairstyles, but even just a black boy being able to wear his hair above maybe an inch. And we're predominantly, well, in St. Kitts, it's a predominantly black society. Or when you go to different, for example, even if you go to the courthouse, if your religion is not that of the Christian faith, when you have to swear, you may have to affirm, but if you don't believe in affirming, you believe in swearing, then there may not be a Quran or a Bhagavad Gita, because we don't recognize that we do have other religions here. So the infractions may be what we call microaggressions, and then of course there remain some serious infractions, which would be, for example, one of which was recently addressed in a high court case about the right to privacy and the right for adults to choose whom they would like to spend their intimate time with. We also have the ongoing debate about the ability for Rastafarians to practice their faith, which includes the use of cannabis. And even though we now have declarations both on cannabis as well as on an amendment to the sodomy laws, when it comes to the practical implementation and enforcement of those rights, there still seem to be some sort of bureaucratic hurdle to that. So it's very much important. What I should say is that St. Kitts is now, and I'm proud to say it, in terms of women holding high positions, we've now moved beyond the 33 mark. I believe we're somewhere around 44%.
And you hit the part of sexual harassment on the workplace. And we know in the Caribbean, we fan that off. We don't pay much attention to it like other folks do in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
How important is it for us to speak on it and get legal advice on that area?
So the interesting thing is, in, I believe it's 1998, CARICOM came together, funded and created a sexual harassment code, which should have been adopted by all of the states. I had the privilege in 2016 to visit St. Lucia, where we reviewed that code, revised it, and brought it up to date.
Nice.
At that point, there were two of the islands which were very close to passing a draft code, Jamaica and Barbados. Both countries then had changes in administrations, and I'm not sure whether the codes were passed. Okay. It's very important, and what I try to explain to persons is sexual harassment is not just about a quote-unquote man and woman issue. It's an economic issue because it also affects productivity, which means it also affects one's ability to efficiently produce as an employee. And of course, the dignity part of it, where as a woman or man, you are faced with a hostile work environment. Now, there's only one part of the laws in St. Kitts where sexual harassment is legislated, meaning that it's found in a written law, and it's a subsidiary legislation, meaning it was one of those passed by the minister, and it's attached to the Public Service Act. Now, with that, it means that only persons who are in the public service would have access to it. But the unfortunate thing about it, it simply says one should not engage in sexual harassment, which is described as, and there's a list. Now, your recourse is to report to your supervisor. Now, if you know anything about sexual harassment, more often than not, it's because the person with authority over you is engaged in these acts, and that is why it becomes a little bit difficult for you, because there's that, you know, I might lose my job, I might get a bad review if I don't entertain this type of behavior. So there's certainly much work there. Outside of that, you have to resort to common law, also known as case law, aka what the courts have said. In our parts, because as a Caribbean, we're very expressive people, there's not much case law on sexual harassment. One that stands out when you go to university, you read about it, where I think it involved a particular bank and the person made a complaint. It came out of Trinidad, and the courts in Trinidad said, in that case, the man would always talk about her body and certain parts of her body. And the judge basically was like, in Trinidad, there's something called pecan, where, you'd make certain, what other places may call lewd comments, but they're just that. They're just comments, they're nothing more. So we always have to kind of fight, and someone who cannot afford a lawyer means that automatically it will be difficult for them to be able to enforce having a dignified workplace, dignified liberty, because sometimes it goes towards touching and etc. So that's an issue that I hope and I trust would be addressed sooner rather than later, now that we have more women in government and on boards.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, to hear you speak of dignified workplace, etc. This year's Human Rights Day theme is dignity, freedom, and justice for all. Practically, what does that look like?
Well, as a lawyer, it's very difficult to answer such a general question with a certain answer. So I would say it depends. It would be remiss if I did not focus on the death penalty, because I am part of the executive of the Greater Caribbean for Life, which is an organization in the Greater Caribbean that deals with the death penalty. Now, when we speak about dignity for all, that should include all human beings. And there is this unfortunate position taken by the Caribbean, including St. Kitts, so far, up to at least St. Kitts' last UPR, January 2021, that the death penalty remains on the books, and our country is not willing to at least vote on a moratorium. A moratorium means at least we will officially say we're not going to execute anyone by death, which is also by hanging, for a period of time. Now, it also ties back to justice. There's a belief that if you take the life of someone, then you should lose your life by the state. So it's referred to as state-sanctioned killing. Now, the irony of saying we're protecting life by taking life only needs to be stated to be understood. But the reasons that we in the Caribbean hold on to the death penalty, if I were to be charitable, are quite unfortunate. We inherited these laws from England or France or whomever colonized us. Yes. And we hold on to it with our dear lives. And the politicians, when you speak to them in private, they may hold a different view, but they all think it will be political suicide to abolish the death penalty, because that's the tool to fight crime. If there was that type of passion in preventing crime, then I think that would serve us better. But for many years, the death penalty has been abolished in most of the countries. In fact, in the countries in the world, there are only 55 retentionist countries, and the Caribbean makes up 13 of the 55. So why are we holding on to this? We're now being judged, and when we're given marks for human rights compliance, this is one of our negative marks. They gave us this law. They then recognized that it was inhumane, undignified. It was against what is considered the inalienable right to life. And so all of these countries have abolished it. We are keeping it. It's in our books. It's in our constitution. It's a legal limit to the right to life if you're convicted of murder. Okay, but what is murder? We haven't even decided to classify murders, because one may commit murder for different reasons. It's not always premeditated. Yes. And I'm using this example not because I have a position on the situation, but I'm using the example simply to show how the same act can occur, but the public can have two completely different responses, and they both come from sandy points. Many years ago, in fact, when we were on the international stage talking about death penalty, in our parts, St. Kitts and Nevis would have been the last country to have executed someone under the death penalty, and that would have been in 1998, December, when Charles Laplace was executed. And he was convicted of a very terrible, terrible act of domestic violence that became fatal. And I definitely do not condone what was done. And my organization, we don't condone crime. We simply say punish the crime, but do not take lives. Because we recognize the difference between punishment, prosecution, and persecution. But the public outcry then would have been very different. It was a domestic violence situation that turned fatal. From the public's outcry this year, I believe it was, when there was also a fatal domestic dispute in Sandy Point. Now, if you ever had the opportunity to read the psychological reports in the Charles Laplace case before he was executed, his position was one of abuse as well. I'm not saying whether that is true or not, but that was his position. His position was one of emotional, mental, and whatever abuse as well. So, but the outcomes were different. And that's why it's very important when we speak about having a specific and fixed punishment of death in whatever the circumstances, it becomes so dangerous. Because when you look at the situation that happened recently, one may say there may have been reasons that it was still a wrongful killing, but there may have been reasons that led to it, which did not make her inhumane or make her a monster for having taken another life. So we always say it's very important because when you take someone's life by the death penalty, it's not reversible. And our systems are flawed. We are humans. And if death sentence is available for treason, which means the government decides that you are guilty of treason, or for murder, general category, then we're treading on a very, very dangerous path. And even in St. Kitts, there have been occasions where persons who everybody believed was guilty of something, including murder, turned out to be freed because they were not. So for me and for my organization, we believe it's very important for justice. Justice does not mean that someone is just given a tap on the shoulder and said, you committed a crime, you go. No, but justice means that even the worst amongst us should be treated with dignity. And I always like to say, we should not become the worst of us. If we say that we believe in protecting life, then we should protect life at all costs. It does not mean that we do not remove from society those who may be a danger to society by putting them in prison or some form of custodial sentence. But it should mean that we find justice in ensuring that we do not create even a ripple effect, because that's what happens. Some people may commit crime, for example, gang violence. It will continue because it's always a retaliation. The only difference between the death penalty is that now the state is doing the retaliation. And why should that happen? Why should I then tell you, you could be a hangman and you can go and hang someone and take their life and it's going to be okay, and then read him a scripture before he dies? I mean, it's a terrible thing. We all complained about being on lockdown during COVID for 14 days in the comfort of our homes. I invite anyone to visit the prison for a day and then think if you could stay there for 25 years and think it's a walk in the park. It's not. So I do believe that there are other effective ways of saying to society, we will not stand for murder, but that should fall short of taking someone's life.